My name's Josh, and I'll start talking about this as Mr. Dennis gets pulled up for me. A little bit about myself. I'm from Northeast Louisiana, born and raised. Work there now. Blessed to be able to stay around home. Mr. Dennis and Mr. RL came to me last year before last, I guess, and we got an idea for a project that we need to look at, maybe help us save a little money on producing some row rice. So I'll go into it with, talking about nitrogen fertilizer or furrow irrigated rice, and we mimic the surge valve on our little areas. So as far as the application goes, we have a picture on the far left, isn't it, showing our injection site and our fertilizer. The middle picture, first time we did the nitrogen injection, we put a dye in there with it just to see how uniform water was moving out. And everything actually looked really uniform, but we were on a wide bed system, and that's mainly to help us facilitate planting with our narrow equipment, narrow drills, small drills. And that in itself was a problem for fertigating rice. And as Mr. Dennis mentioned earlier, we're doing multiple low nitrogen events to help manage nitrogen efficiency there. So for the farmer standard, we had two areas. We had a farmer standard and we had a fertigation site, and then we had no water, no nitrogen basically area. So the farmer standard received 3 applications of 100 pounds of urea. We applied that by ground each time. One time we had to apply it by hand because we just kept getting a lot of rain. We only irrigated whenever soil moisture sensors called for it. We were a little late on one irrigation, but that was due to other issues that we couldn't. The pump went down, so we had to wait on it to get back running. The fertigation treatment received 3 applications of 50 pounds of nitrogen as liquid UAN, 32%. And we injected that into the irrigation water and applied that to the rice. For each fertigation time, the fertilizer injection was started as soon as we started beginning running water into the poly pipe, or that section of the pipe. So the pipe was still flat as we began injecting the fertilizer. And not sure if we did that every time that way. Can't remember.
It changed every time. We altered it every time.
But so for each application method, we basically did 3 different ways to try to move the nitrogen evenly down the row and get the nitrogen to move across the wide beds. So each time we ran the fertigation, we take NDVI pictures, images, and then we try to see what may have went wrong. We had water samples, tissue samples, biomass samples. So for the first fertigation event, application was made to wet soil. And this is a Sharky clay soil, and again, this is shrink swell soil. And being shrink swell, once it seals, it's, wonder if nitrogen is actually getting into the soil, So we're still playing with this in that respect, but for the first fertigation, it was on wet soil, and we injected for the poly pipe. It took about 22 minutes to get the amount of nitrogen we need to cover the area that we were trying to fertilize. And so for the second one, application, we injected the fertilizer, prior to the pipe being full. The total amount of a 50-50 mixture of UAN and water was injected in 31 minutes. It took a little longer. We diluted it on this time because we felt like we weren't getting an even movement of the nitrogen down the field, so we tried to mix it with water to help with the mixing in the pipe. And I'll show a little data on that in just a second. And so for the third fertigation, we applied it to it and the soil was crusted. That's when we started, and I think that might be where we need to go in the future, is just having a good crust on the soil and mimic the surge from there. Apply enough nitrogen for the first surge and then come back with our second surge after that. Because the whole premise behind this is that we can cut out 3 application airplane costs. I mean, that's a lot of money saved at the end of the day, $20. Monitoring, similar to what Mr. Dennis talked about, we had 2 reference strips on the east end of the field. We had water moisture sensors, and we also, that's an image in the top right of what the plots look like. So in the top very right, that's the farmer standard. The middle section, 4 little rectangles, that's the no water, no nitrogen, and then the fertigation section there. And again, here's a better image. This is your farmer standard areas, remaining field, no nitrogen, no water, fertigation. And you can tell from the NDVI July 9th, which we're getting right there, green ring there, stage, you can see the fertigation is probably not pushing the nitrogen all the way down the furrow yet. And again, we were learning as we go on this one, because we didn't know exactly how this was going to move, how the nitrogen was going to move, and how much would be in the pipe and all that good stuff. A little different image, and what you'll notice, took the plots out, the fertigation started about right here. You'll notice we kind of have an angle where as we got further down the pipe, maybe get some nitrogen all the way to the end. Maybe not an even distribution of the nitrogen coming from the poly pipe. But, we looked at a lot of water sample data, and so Mr. Dennis and Mr. Ariel collected samples, and at 115, that's when the nitrogen application was going on the full pipe. You'll see these are a concentration of total nitrogen within the poly pipe. So 24.1 for the first, or the hole closest to the injection site at that time at 115. And then as you move down the pipe, you'll notice that it kind of starts to peter off in this early part. So nitrogen hadn't quite made it all the way down to the end. We'll get a lot coming out at the front. By the end of the second time, at the end of the nitrogen application, as soon as that injection stopped, which was about 15-30 minutes, took another sample, and you'll notice now that there's more nitrogen at the lower end of the pipe. And if you look at the total nitrogen through the vent, it was pretty similar. The first hole, I guess because due to that first flush, had higher nitrogen content, but for the most part, it's pretty even distribution. And next year, we're going to do a lot more in terms of where we sample the water along the furrow to make sure that it is moving evenly across. And here's yields. This is the biggest story. And we look, this is the farmer standard on the right, the no nitrogen in the middle, and the fertigation. Top numbers are NDVI, and the bottom numbers are yield. So if you look at the bottom corner, a farmer standard average 179. The fertigation side on average across all plots was 142. And those are 60-foot plots with 30-foot alleys in them. And again, we had a lot of other data, tissue sample data, but yields kind of show you the same trend as earlier. High yields on the front two tiers, and then these start dropping off and maintaining higher. You kind of still see that pattern. The NDVI is telling us a lot there in terms of what our yield potential will be. So our challenge now is to make sure we're getting the water all the way down the furrow before we cut off the water supply, I believe. So kind of getting into that, the research plans for 2020, last year we were behind corn, which is probably not the ideal case, but that's all we had to work with. This year we will be behind soybeans. We have good row conditions. Mr. Dennis mentioned about row height. I think we'll get a lot better stand. We did have some patchy stands in the other field because how we had to work it. Probably plant at an angle, as he mentioned earlier, to help facilitate. We don't want to pack down the wheel or our furrows on our small acres that we have to use, and water to shoot across it quicker than it's moving across the bed when we're trying to put nitrogen on the field. And as I mentioned, we're going to do a lot more with water sampling and collecting to see how things are moving. We're going to do some of that this fall, actually, on some wheat that we have planted. We'll try to refine this method, and I think it'll work. Clay soils or tricky soils to work with, just because of the nature of the beast. They stay wet, dry slowly, and once they do dry, they get dry really quick. We'll continue monitoring with NDVI. I think that's the quickest, best method that you can really see what's going on. And they took pictures each time after We fertigated, and 1 week later, right before we made our next fertigation, we took some more images. But I believe that's pretty much all I had. If y'all had any questions, comments, suggestions, if you've ever tried fertigation.
I'm very interested in it and even putting it into, other crops, but if you look at something that already is working consistently as a pivot, and it's the same concept, and it's all the way across the top. So why is the fertilizer being distributed unevenly in the polypipe? And is that a area of concern when you are fertigating with a pivot? Is it uneven, or is it a lot more uniform?
Well, I've looked at some other research, and we might have had some uneven areas in the samples, but I really think on the average, it's fairly uniform. I just don't think we pushed it down the furrow far enough. Maybe I wasn't clear. In the poly or center pivot system, you'll have even mixing and distribution through it.
But coming out of each hole from by your well to the end of the pipe.
Well, that's when we started injecting the nitrogen. The pipe was flat, so a lot of nitrogen was right there near that first hole whenever the pipe got full, and then it has to push the nitrogen down the pipe. If you were already turned on your pivot, your pipe was full of water, and then you started injecting nitrogen, you're probably going to get a better mix. And we were injecting close to where we were fertigating, so we didn't have a run that we could mix very well. We just were restrained by the size of the area.
So basically,
So would it be better to run down to the middle of it and then tee off going each way? That way you had.
That's a great idea, and something we had this.
We had, this was strictly a learning process. And
Yeah.
after the first time we did it, we injected just straight UAN. And then Dr. Brendan Trevanian, the fertility specialist, said, oh no, mix it 50-50. Said, you're not getting good enough mixing, so add 50% water. Well, and we're not sure if it didn't settle out or if the fertilizer settled out. And this is all, as Josh said, we changed every time we water, every time we fertilize, we change something. Because we're just adapting as we go along and figuring out what works and what doesn't work.
right. Do you feel like you feel positive when you've got it figured out in the near future that it's something that's going to be viable to do, to run it through polypipe?
I think so.
We can get it figured out and where it will be even.
I can't say that. We did figure out though, this was a wide bed. Now you have to understand this research station stuff, everything was, 5 foot. But the field we're in next year, we talked about we probably will water every minute instead of every other. And we think that'll get us a little better. It'll at least allow the water to more opportunities for the fertilizer to separate.
I must have hid that one slide, but I have where we took biomass at the final rating, and we took it from the outside 2 rows, the middle right and left 2 rows, and the center 2 rows from the drills. And you can see on the outside we had a lot of biomass, and as we worked our way in on the wide beds, less and less. And it's just nitrogen is not moving across those wide beds. We needed that middle furrow.
On that, several years ago at the station, we played with the corn, and we made it work on corn. But now that was strictly, we had a 30-gallon drum, and we just pumped it in there. We just did it, just to do it, and we made it work. And but with this, it's much more, it has to be more detailed.
Do you feel pretty confident you make it come out of polypipe even one end of it?
Have no idea.
I think we can, but it's going to be challenging.
Sample out each one that random for analysis.
Yeah, we took them, what did we take, 20, the last time we took a total of 26 samples during the fertigation. We had them spaced, that we didn't, and that was strictly coming out of the pipe.
That was at the pipe, so we're going to move samples down the furrow as well. We'll take sample, and we're going to really mimic a surge. So if we want to run it 100 feet in our case to surge, that's the only amount of nitrogen we're going to put. And once it gets that 100 feet, we will shut it down and let it soak completely in. And I think that's when we're going to start getting better distribution. And then we'll cut the water back on, let it flush across there fast, nitrogen not moving into the wet spot, and then it'll fill in our back half, if that makes sense. That way we have a crust and we know we're getting nitrogen in the soil when it's crusted. I'm concerned that we're not getting nitrogen in the soil once it's wet.
But we also don't want nitrogen to run out the tail water.
I didn't show you, but we had on the tailwater sample, when you cut it off, it was fairly low. You know, we were losing some, no doubt, but I thought it would have been higher, to be honest. There was like 2.81 parts per million in the tailwater sample for like both times you took it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, in a year, we'll come back and tell you whether we either did better or we still struggled.
I think we'll figure it out, but it's a challenge so far, and that's for sure. But I found, Mr. James Hendricks gave me a thesis from University of Arkansas. It was done in the 80s, and they did some irrigating of rice, fertigation of rice, and it was on Sharky soils as well. And they were getting even distribution down the road. So I think it's doable. It's just getting the method perfect to make sure we're nitrogen stopping where we want it to down the road.
Good deal. I think we're through. If anybody wants credit, be sure to sign up there.
Thank y'all.
Good deal.